Why are people okay with giving birth to heavily disabled children? I have just read a post on Instagram about a mother who gave birth to a heavily disabled child. She is now 11 years old. She cannot speak, has no control of her bodily function and possesses the intelligence of a 1/2-year-old, asking for donations since she can no longer afford to take care of her in her house. She specified in the post that she already knew before she gave birth that her child was going to be heavily disabled. My question is, if she knew her child would be so heavily disabled and would have never developed her intelligence past infancy, why did she have her? Isn't it cruel to bring into the world someone completely incapable of taking care of themselves, communicate or understand the world? Especially if you don't have the means to properly take care of them? I am not talking about disabilities that can only be found after the birth, but those that are already fully predictable during the pregnancy through DNA testing or ultrasounds. Edit. So many people here are not getting the question. I am not saying we should kill the kid. I am posing a question that can only be analyzed in retrospect. Of course, I am not suggesting we just off her. This girl deserves all the love of the world and I truly hope she can be cared for better in the future. This question is not eugenics. I am not talking about disabilities in general. I am not suggesting we abort all children affected by Down, spina bifida etc. If you read the post you would clearly understand this is not the question. Nor I am talking about people who become disabled later in life. 3. I repeat the question. You are a parent. You fully know before the child's birth that they will be severely mentally and physically disabled, lacking the mental ability to understand the world and also in a lot of pain. You parent also know you won't have the means to care for this child. What do you think of the situation? Should this child be living, or should the parent have terminated the pregnancy? One of the various reasons I am not interested in having children is because I know that I would not be capable of caring for a heavily disabled child, and that's just part of the roulette of creating life. Grief is weird. Sometimes people stay in denial about what's happening, or just hope it'll be okay in the end after all. If she could go back in time, knowing what she knows now, she might have made a different choice. 'Cause they're attached to the kid already, believe, maybe naively, they can give it a fighting chance at life, have maybe suffered birth loss before, religious reasons, ignorance, it won't be as bad for us, religious reasons, family pressure, etc. etc. Religious reasons, I like how you wrote religious reasons 2 times. Because it's true. As someone with a birth defect that has a wide range of prognoses, I think people see success stories and think, that's how my kid will be. I see so many parents of kids with the same condition I have who glory in saying, the doctors told us to abort, that our child wouldn't walk, talk, be potty trained, etc. But look how wrong they were. I'm pro-choice, including when parents know they will have a disabled child if they carry to term. On the one hand, one should become a parent only if they're prepared to have a disabled child, as disability can happen at any point. But knowing how to prepare and then actually being adequately prepared is difficult because you just don't know. As I said earlier, you can have 2 children with the same disability but wildly different prognoses. Well, I'm not sure about one kid, but I have a coworker proudly saying he has 5 grandchildren from the same daughter, all with very bad disabilities. You know, one might be about love, religion etc. but 5 is total ignorance emo. I don't know, because as someone who is disabled and actually has genes that are terrible to pass on, this is one big reason I chose not to have children. I wasn't going to do that to them or me. It's not necessarily religion. As an expecting parent, deciding to have an abortion because your child is likely to have a disability can feel like you are giving up on your child. You may have already formed a connection with them emotionally, and terminating a pregnancy may feel the same as abandoning your child. As someone who went through with the abortion upon finding out he would have spina bifida at 24 weeks, it 100% did feel in some ways like I gave up on him, and I think about it almost daily. It was the hardest decision I ever had to make, and I had about 12 hours to make it. Thank you American abortion laws. But I knew I could not handle a lifetime of caring for his medical needs. Multiple possibilities here. People can be heavily attached to a baby before they are born. Going for abortion isn't an easy decision at all. They don't want to do an abortion because of religion or any other, possibly health-related, reason. They somehow have hope that their child will eventually manage, even though that's not the case most of the time. Also, some people don't have access to abortion, which in turn complicates the outcome of the child giving birth and ends up being one of the things you mentioned. I've also heard, often from a religious perspective, that it is inappropriate to decide if someone else's life is not worth living. You do not know what it is like to be your child, so guessing and saying yeesh it would be better they were never born is not your place. I've heard it compared to, but not equated with, eugenics as well, as they both carry ideas of deciding what kind of bodies are acceptable. I went to high school with a woman who has a severely disabled son. I follow their story mostly from social media, so I'm not quite clear if she knew how dire his disability was during her pregnancy. I first heard about it at a class reunion, that her son had a fatal brain and neurological condition that would end his life likely before he was 10. He is now in his 20s and so debilitated that he has to have someone physically in the same room 24/7. His mom is a single mother with several other kids of various ages who help out where they can while still trying to live their own lives. His mom's pleas for help are heartbreaking every time he suffers a new setback. She loves her son beyond measure, and the suffering endured by their entire family is absolutely devastating. I can't imagine, had she known the depth of the suffering her entire family would be faced with, that she would choose to move forward with her pregnancy. Yet the love they all feel for him is also incredible. My wife's older son is autistic and developmentally disabled. That's not something she knew in advance though. She finally had to put him in a group home because she couldn't handle his needs while working and also raising her younger son. We do visit him regularly, but he's only somewhat aware we're visiting. He's in his own little world and actually seems happy. I don't think he has the mental acuity to realize he's different. So it may not be as cruel as you think, depending on the issues and level of understanding the person has. My cousin is in his late 20s. Mental age about 8. He is short but built like a tank. Very strong and can be violent, making a home necessary. He loves the group home. He is manager of the laundry room, which he is very proud of. Empties the lint trap, makes sure the other guys use soap and measures it for them, sweeps the floor. Things like that. We worked hard to make his room nice, his own TV and DVD player with tons of DVDs. He has grown to be very independent, which he was not previously. It has made such an incredible difference in him. There's a huge difference between autism and the kinds of issues I'm fairly certain OP is talking about, like fetal abnormalities where a child is going to be born without half their brain. Even the most severely autistic people who are still non-verbal as adults etc. are able to breathe on their own without machines unless there's something else wrong, usually feed themselves solid foods, and have interests and things they enjoy. There are disabled children who will never breathe without being hooked up to a machine, eat anything that isn't unflavored formula through a tube, voluntarily and purposely use their hands, among other things. A college friend had a brother that was similar. The family couldn't give him as strict of a routine as he needed, but the care home could. They had regular expected visits, which he seemed much happier with. I could never bring a child like that into this world. I am 16 weeks, and I am attached to my avocado. That being said, if I found out he would be born with no quality of life due to severe disabilities, I would abort. I would be upset obviously, but I can try again. If the kid was born, I am sure I would love it, but that isn't the point. Kids like that are better off aborted. Sounds harsh, but it is true. I don't have an answer, but I overheard a friend talking about someone he knew in the military that all 5 of his kids were disabled. 5. But then got kicked out of the military because medical bills were way too high and TRICARE didn't want to cover it anymore. At some point, did he and his wife not think to get genetic testing done? Were they just gonna keep going until they had a child that wasn't disabled? I have so many questions. Ada. The TRICARE thing may or may not be true. IDK. Just going by what I thought I heard my friend say. Someone else apparently knows that he didn't get kicked out because of TRICARE but didn't state what actually happened. That bit of info is besides the point of my post anyway. I could not imagine looking into my child's eyes knowing that I chose to bring them into the world knowing that they would suffer. I work in this field. I take care of the adults whose families gave up long ago. In the 30s, 40s, 50s these kids were placed in institutions. I have elderly disabled individuals who have came from the institutions. The scars and signs of abuse are horrendous. Nowadays typically the state pays for those kids to remain home. Families can get paid or gain paid caregivers. If insurance doesn't cover a need, a waiver can cover the cost. Then there's the families who abuse the system, use the money, and do the bare minimum for their kid. 80% of my caseload were institutionalized or given up and adopted, then turned over to the state because behaviors were too much once they got too big. 99% have very sad stories and know no different. I've had 2 whose families were so loving and cared so deeply, but the parents grew older and needed help. I'll get hell for this, but honestly some should have never been born. They are a body, a shell, with no way to communicate or move and only show signs of fear. It is so sad. But I do my best to teach my staff to best support every single person and help them have the best life possible. I advocate for each and every one of them on a daily basis. I've argued with doctors for better care, fought insurance companies, and helped others understand them. I'm their voice when no one else deems they matter. Iceland has it figured out, terminating pregnancy because the child will have a moderate to severe disability as common practice there. Before I type my response, the amount of edge in these responses saying it's religion or magical thinking never ceases to amaze me. Reddit is an interesting place. Here's my answer. Because they are human and can already form an emotional bond with their unborn, soon-to-be disabled child. People act like everyone has to be emotionless and 100% rational and abort their child. And while it makes sense to some people, it doesn't make sense to others. You or myself can think it's irrational to care for a disabled child. But to the parents the child can mean the world to them. Maybe they should abort, but it's on the parents to decide, not us. Because they are human and can already form an emotional bond with their unborn, soon-to-be disabled child. I think most people here understand this. But such big decisions that heavily involve someone else's well-being and quality of life should not be made solely based on emotion. I can't imagine making a decision like this without thinking about the long-term future. If not mine, at least the child's. What would their life look like at 10, for instance? What will become of them if something happens to me? Will my partner also be willing and able to sacrifice their whole life for this child? Quite a few others, probably. You don't have to be an emotional robot to at least consider these aspects. Personally, I can't actually imagine making any big, life-changing decisions without considering some of the possible long-term consequences beforehand, especially if it affects other people too. When my mom was pregnant with me, she was told I was at high risk for Downs. She didn't want to mess with the risk of the procedure where they take amniotic fluid because she said it wouldn't change her decision. She was going to have me either way. I guess she was already in love with the idea of me and willing to take on that challenge. I was born normal. I can't say I would have made the same call in her position. I had this conversation with my mum yesterday and she thinks I am a horrible person. I, personally, don't know and wouldn't. I was born incredibly ill. I'm a Chernobyl baby. Mother was pregnant with me and in the area. She's been through so much just to keep me alive. About 2 years ago, I remember talking to my mother about how difficult it is for me now that I'm becoming fully disabled, and have been for about 1.5 years now, and she lamented that I was born, saying something like if only I'd miscarried. And then she immediately caught herself and started apologizing, saying she loved me so much and she'd never wish for me to die and she's grateful she had me, and I had to stop and interrupt her to tell her that it's okay. I understand. And I agree. If she had miscarried, I'd not have been born and I wouldn't be suffering so much, frequent chronic pain, every single day. She was shocked that not only was I not upset with her thoughtless statement, but that I agreed. As someone who does suffer so much, I find it positively cruel to bring a child into this world that you know would suffer. If I'd known that any of our kids would have serious conditions, I'd have aborted. I do not think it's a noble or virtuous thing to bring a child into the world that will needlessly suffer just because you will take care of it. You have to think about how that child's life will go like with whatever condition. It's not about you. It's about the life you're making. For those reasons, I cannot imagine bringing a life into the world that would suffer. And for some reason, many people consider it virtuous to care for a disabled child. What would be actually virtuous is for that disabled child to never have to suffer in life at all. But that's a decision many people refuse to make because of personal beliefs that trump the quality of life for others. And it's absurd. I chose to terminate at 30 weeks because my daughter would have been severely disabled thanks to toxoplasmosis. There was a better than 50% chance she would have been little more than a vegetable. At best she would have been blind, deaf, severely intellectually impaired and experiencing frequent seizures. We made the decision because as much as she was desperately wanted and loved, we didn't want her to suffer. And we knew, at 38 and 40, that we would have struggled to care for her if she'd survived to adulthood. It's such a difficult decision. We were lucky enough to live in NZ so could terminate for medical reasons up till full term. We found out at 23 weeks she had contracted toxoplasmosis, but it took till 29 weeks to confirm it wasn't going to be a mild case. We knew we could deal with mild disabilities. So we didn't want to be hasty, and when they first found it, it was mild. But despite heavy medication, she continued to get worse and worse. There's a lot of misinformation out there on TFMR, especially late term. We haven't gone public about it, just close family and friends, because we knew there would be a lot of negativity. People talk about babies born alive and then killed, or torn limb from limb alive. But in reality, her heart was stopped with an injection and I have birth naturally once she had passed. That misinformation would put a lot of people off. I am a social worker that works with disabled adults, just for some context. And my stepson has autism and a moderate cognitive disability. It's tough to draw a line between this person will be disabled and face a lot of barriers but is worth the effort, and that person is too disabled to be worth the care to keep them alive. It's a rough distinction. I know many adults who use wheelchairs, prosthetic limbs, robot assistants, speech equipment, a plethora of medical devices for nearly any body function. I know adults who do not speak at all, sign language or verbal language. I know adults whose only verbal sounds are echoes of the last few words just said to them. Adults who will need 24/7 care and supervision for their whole lives. It's such a wide range and spectrum. Some folks are disabled but living their best life anyway. Some are struggling due to lack of access and care. Some could be thriving but don't have supportive family or a good care team. Some may always be a vegetable. Identifying the two extremes is easy. But somewhere between them, you'd have to draw a line. That line is blurry at best. My biggest worry is normalizing abortion for moderate disabilities, and therefore society moves away from opening access and prioritizing care. It's easy to say, oh, we will just abort disabled kids instead of paying people to educate them, or paying to build apartments that can house them, or building community buildings that are accessible to them, or funding government programs that provide care and technology and home modifications and basic income and job support.